The wrench slipped from David Walsh's oil-stained fingers and clattered against the concrete floor of his workshop. He cursed under his breath and bent down to retrieve it, his back protesting after 8 straight hours of repairs. The mining drill before him looked like a mechanical corpse, its guts spread across his workbench in organized chaos. Outside the reinforced windows, Outpost Pharaoh 7's eternal winter painted everything in shades of white and gray. "Daddy, look what I drew." Lucy's small voice cut through the hum of the space heaters. David glanced over at his 7-year-old daughter sitting cross-legged on a pile of thermal blankets in the corner. She held up a piece of paper covered in crayon marks. 3 stick figures held hands under a crooked sun. He recognized himself, Lucy, and the third figure with long hair. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. The third figure was her mother, gone 2 years now in a mining accident that still haunted the colony's collective memory. Lucy nodded and went back to her drawing, humming a tuneless song. David returned his attention to the drill's power core. The miners needed this equipment operational by morning, and he needed the payment to keep the heat running in their small quarters attached to the workshop. Life on an asteroid mining colony didn't forgive mistakes or missed deadlines. A sharp beep cut through the workshop. David's emergency scanner, mounted on the wall near his tool rack, flashed red. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and walked over to check the display. A distress signal, faint and intermittent, coming from somewhere in the ice fields beyond the colony's outer perimeter. "Probably another damaged probe," he muttered. The mining company scattered automated sensors throughout the asteroid's surface, and they failed constantly in the extreme cold. Still, protocol required checking any distress signal. He made a note to investigate after finishing the drill. "I'm going to get more crayons from the supply box," Lucy announced, sliding off her blanket nest. "Stay in the workshop," David called after her without looking up. "Don't go into the storage area. It's too cold." "I know, Daddy." He heard her footsteps padding across the floor, then the soft whoosh of the interior door opening. The workshop had 3 sections: the main repair bay where he worked, a small living quarters, and a storage area that connected to the external airlock. He kept the storage area unheated to save power, using it only for equipment that could handle the cold. David was elbow deep in the drill's wiring when Lucy's scream pierced the air. Not a playful scream. Not an excited scream. A scream of pure distress that sent ice through his veins and launched him across the workshop before his mind caught up with his body. He burst through the storage area door and found Lucy kneeling by the external airlock, her arms wrapped around something small and dark. "Daddy, the little dragon is freezing." David's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The creature in his daughter's arms was roughly the size of a house cat, covered in scales that should have been vibrant but instead showed a deathly blue-white color. Small wings, translucent and delicate, hung limp against its body. The head was vaguely reptilian with a short snout and closed eyes. Wisps of frost clung to its scales. "Lucy, put that down right now," David said, his voice tight with fear. Unknown alien species could carry diseases, could be venomous, could be dangerous in ways humans couldn't predict. "No," Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "He's dying, Daddy. He's so cold." The creature made a sound, a weak chirping noise that barely registered above the howling wind outside. One tiny clawed foot twitched. David saw his daughter's face, saw the desperate determination there, and something in his chest cracked open. He thought of his wife, who had died pulling 3 miners from a collapsing tunnel. She always said that fear was just an excuse people used to avoid doing the right thing. "Bring it into the workshop," he said quietly. "Quickly." Lucy stumbled to her feet, cradling the creature against her chest. David guided them back into the heated repair bay and grabbed an emergency thermal blanket from his first aid kit. He spread it on his workbench, pushing tools aside, and Lucy gently laid the small dragon down. Up close, David could see the creature was beautifully made, despite its dire condition. Its scales formed intricate patterns and small ridges ran along its spine. The wings were translucent membranes stretched between thin bones. It looked almost prehistoric, like something from Earth's ancient past brought forward into the space age. "Where did you find it?" David asked, pulling a heat lamp over and positioning it above the creature. "By the airlock. The door was open a crack. I think it was trying to get inside." Lucy touched one of the creature's tiny horns gently. "We have to help him, Daddy." David's scanner beeped again, more insistent now. He glanced at the display and felt his stomach drop. The distress signal wasn't coming from a damaged probe. The frequency was all wrong. It was a biological signature, and now that he looked closer, There were two more signals, much larger, coming from the same location in the ice fields. "Lucy," he said slowly, "if there's a baby, there must be parents." The small dragon's eyes fluttered open, revealing vertical pupils and eyes that swirled with golden and amber colors. It looked at Lucy and made another weak chirping sound. Lucy's face lit up with hope. David stared at his daughter, then at the dying creature, then at his scanner showing two more life signs fading in the frozen wasteland outside. Every regulation, every safety protocol, every piece of common sense screamed at him to call colony security and let them handle it. Instead, he grabbed his thermal jacket from its hook. "Stay here and keep that heat lamp on it," he told Lucy. "I'll be back soon." "You're going to save them?" Lucy asked, her voice small and hopeful. David thought of his wife, of the choice between safe and right, between rules and compassion. He thought of how Lucy would remember this moment for the rest of her life. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, sealing his jacket and checking his oxygen supply. "We're going to save them." The emergency lights began flashing as his scanner detected the larger life signs growing weaker. David grabbed a portable heater and a cargo sled from the storage area. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, and somewhere in that frozen hell, something was dying. He hit the airlock button and stepped into the cold. The ice field stretched before David like an alien ocean frozen mid-wave. His breath came in short clouds inside his helmet as he dragged the cargo sled behind him. Following the blinking coordinates on his wrist display, the portable heater on the sled hummed steadily, its power cell draining faster than he liked in the brutal cold. Outpost Pharaoh 7 sat behind him, a collection of lights growing smaller with each step. The signal led him to a ridge of ice formations, twisted spires that rose from the asteroid's surface like frozen fingers reaching for the stars. His headlamp caught something metallic wedged between two of the larger spires. A shuttle, small and unfamiliar in design, its hull cracked and bleeding heat into the void. The craft looked like it had been there for days, slowly freezing into the ice. David approached carefully, watching for structural instability. The shuttle's hatch hung open, frost coating its edges. He pulled himself up and peered inside. Two of them lay intertwined in the cargo hold, their bodies wrapped around each other. They were larger than any human, perhaps 3 meters long from snout to tail, with wings folded tight against their bodies. Their scales should have shimmered with color, David somehow knew, but now they showed the same deathly blue-white as the baby. One had a wing bent at an unnatural angle. The other had deep cracks running through its scales, oozing a substance that had frozen into crystalline patterns. They were dying, both of them. David could see their chests barely moving, their breath coming in shallow gasps that created tiny frost clouds. He pulled his portable scanner from his belt and ran it over them. The readings made no sense. Their body temperature had dropped to levels that would kill a human 3 times over, yet they still clung to life. Whatever these creatures were, they needed heat like humans needed oxygen. "Hang on," David muttered, knowing they probably couldn't hear him. "Just hang on." He pulled the portable heater from his sled and set it up in the shuttle's hold, cranking it to maximum output. The device protested, its safety warnings flashing, but David overrode them. Heat began filling the small space. He watched the creatures closely, looking for any sign of response. One of them, the one with the broken wing, moved slightly. Her eye, he decided it was female for no reason he could explain, opened partway. The eye was larger than his fist, golden with swirling patterns of orange and red. It fixed on him, and David felt the weight of intelligence behind that gaze. She tried to move, to position herself between David and the other dragon, protective even in her dying state. The movement cost her, and she collapsed back with a sound that was half hiss, half whimper. "I'm not going to hurt you," David said softly. "Your baby is safe. My daughter found it. We're trying to help." The dragon's eye remained fixed on him, unblinking. Then slowly the defensive tension left her body. She couldn't know what his words meant, but something in his tone or his body language must have communicated intent, trust, or perhaps just the acceptance of someone too weak to fight anymore. David worked quickly. He couldn't carry them back to the colony on the cargo sled, they were too large. But he could stabilize them, warm them enough to survive, and then call for help. Except calling for help meant involving colony administration, and they would have questions. Questions about unauthorized alien contact, about bringing unknown species into the habitat, about every regulation David was currently breaking. His comm unit crackled. Daddy? Lucy's voice came through tinny and worried. Is the baby's family okay? David looked at the two dying dragons, then at his daughter's voice on the other end of the line, then at the stars visible through the shuttle's cracked viewport. The universe felt very large and very cold in that moment. They're alive, he said. But Lucy, they're really big. I need you to do something for me. Anything, Daddy. In my workshop, there's a storage locker marked emergency supplies. Inside are 3 more portable heaters. I need you to turn them all on and set them up around the baby. Can you do that? Yes. The baby is moving a little now. He made a sound. Despite everything, David smiled. That's good, sweetheart. That's really good. I'm going to bring his parents home, but it's going to take time. You keep him warm, okay? I will. I promise. The comm went silent. David turned back to the dragons and made his decision. He couldn't move them together, and he couldn't leave one here to freeze while he transported the other. So he would have to make 2 trips, dragging each dragon back to the colony on the sled, hoping neither died in transit, hoping his power cells held out, hoping his daughter kept the baby alive, hoping 1,000 things that were outside his control. He moved to the male dragon first, the one with cracked scales, thinking he looked slightly stronger than the female. Getting the creature onto the sled took 20 minutes of careful pushing and pulling, terrified he would injure it further. The dragon was heavy, far heavier than his build suggested, and David's muscles screamed in protest. But finally he had the creature secured with cargo straps. The female watched with those intelligent eyes as David prepared to leave with her mate. She made a sound, low and rumbling, that David felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. I'm coming back for you, David told her. I swear, I'm not leaving you here. He didn't know if she understood, but her eye closed slowly, a gesture that felt like acceptance or perhaps trust. David grabbed the sled's handle and began the long walk back to the colony. The wind picked up, howling around him, trying to push him back or push him down. His oxygen gauge dropped steadily. The sled caught on ice formations, forcing him to backtrack and find new routes. Twice the dragon slipped partway off the sled, and David had to stop to resecure the straps with fingers going numb despite his gloves. When the workshop lights finally appeared ahead, David wanted to cry with relief. But he couldn't stop, not yet. He dragged the sled to the airlock and hit the access panel. The outer door opened and he pulled the dragon inside. Lucy's face appeared in the window of the inner door, her eyes wide. She saw the massive creature and pressed both hands against the glass. Behind her, David could see the baby dragon on his workbench, surrounded by heat lamps moving more actively now. The airlock cycled. David pulled the sled into the workshop and the temperature difference hit him like a physical force. He immediately began checking the male dragon's vital signs. Weak but stable. The heat was helping. There's another one, Lucy said quietly. Isn't there? David nodded, already dreading the second journey. His mother. I have to go back. Then go, Lucy said with a confidence that surprised him. I'll watch them. David looked at his 7-year-old daughter standing between 2 massive alien creatures, showing no fear, only determination. When had she become so brave? He turned back to the airlock. The cold waited outside, and somewhere in it, a mother dragon fought to survive. David's workshop had transformed into something between a medical bay and a sauna. Every heater he owned ran at full capacity, turning the space into a sweltering cocoon that made sweat run down his back. The 3 dragons lay arranged around the room, the baby nestled between its parents on a pile of thermal blankets. Lucy sat cross-legged nearby, watching them with the focused attention of a guardian angel. 2 days had passed since the rescue. 2 days of David running his power usage into dangerous territory. 2 days of ignoring the concerned messages from colony administration. 2 days of pretending everything was normal while harboring 3 massive aliens in his workshop. The male dragon, whom Lucy had named Grevik after a character in her storybook, had recovered first. His cracked scales were healing, the frozen substance that leaked from them replaced by a warm amber liquid that hardened into protective patches. He could lift his head now, could move his limbs, could watch David with eyes that held both wariness and gratitude. The female, Nalith, according to Lucy, who seemed to have an endless supply of names, was taking longer. Her broken wing would need more than heat to heal properly, and David had no idea how to splint a dragon wing. He did his best with foam padding and support rods from his spare parts collection, creating a contraption that looked ridiculous but seemed to ease her pain. She accepted his ministrations without protest, occasionally making that low rumbling sound that David had learned meant acknowledgement or thanks. The baby, whom Lucy called Spark because of the tiny wisps of smoke that occasionally puffed from his nostrils, had become his daughter's shadow. The little dragon followed her everywhere his parents would allow, chirping and flapping his wings in an effort to fly that only resulted in tumbling forward. David was checking Nalith's wing splint when someone knocked on the workshop door. He froze, meeting Lucy's worried gaze across the room. The knocking came again, more insistent. "David Walsh, this is Administrator Ford. Open the door. We need to talk." David looked at the dragons. There was no hiding them, no way to pretend they didn't exist. Grevik sensed the tension and shifted his body to shield Nalith and Spark. His scales rippling with colors David had learned meant protective alertness. "Stay calm," David whispered, unsure if he was talking to the dragons or himself. He walked to the door and opened it. Administrator Ford stood in the corridor, a thin man with graying hair and the permanent frown of someone who dealt with regulations all day. Behind him stood Doc Stevens, the colony medic, and 2 security officers. Ford's eyes widened when he saw past David into the workshop. "Dear God," Ford breathed. The reports were true. "They needed help," David said simply. "They're aliens, Walsh, unregistered, unidentified aliens. Do you have any idea how many protocols you've violated?" Ford pushed past him into the workshop, the security officers following. Doc Stevens hung back, his weathered face unreadable. Lucy stood up, placing herself between the visitors and Spark. The baby dragon chirped nervously and pressed against her legs. "These creatures need to be contained," Ford continued. "We need to contact the research division, arrange proper quarantine facilities." "They're not creatures," Lucy said, her voice small but firm. "They're a family." Ford looked at her like he had just noticed she was there. "Young lady, this is not a matter for children. These aliens could be dangerous." "They're not dangerous," Lucy insisted. They were freezing. "We saved them." Grevik made a sound, a low growl that vibrated through the floor. The security officers reached for their weapons. David stepped forward quickly, hands raised. "Don't," he said sharply. "He's just protecting his family. Wouldn't you do the same?" "That's exactly my point," Ford said. "We don't know what they're capable of. They need to be separated, studied, contained until we understand what we're dealing with." "No," David said. Ford turned to him, eyebrows raised. "Excuse me?" I said no. "They stay here. They stay together. Mr. Walsh, I can have you arrested for obstruction. I can have your contract terminated. You'll be off this colony on the next transport." Lucy's hand found David's. He squeezed it gently. "Then do it," David said quietly. "But these dragons stay together, stay warm, and stay safe. That's not negotiable." The room fell silent except for the hum of the heaters and Spark's nervous chirping. Ford's face reddened, but before he could respond, Doc Stevens stepped forward. "I'd like to examine them," the medic said calmly. "If you'll allow it, David." David nodded slowly. Doc Stevens had delivered Lucy, had treated David's wife after the accident, had served the colony for 30 years. If anyone could be trusted, it was him. The old medic approached Grevik carefully, his scanner out but his movements non-threatening. Grevik watched him but didn't growl. Stevens ran the scanner over the dragon's body, then moved to Nalith, then finally to Spark, who tried to hide behind Lucy. "Fascinating," Stevens murmured. "Their biology is silicon-based, partially crystalline. They're not just cold-blooded. They require high temperatures to maintain cellular function. Below 30 degrees Celsius, they essentially enter a death spiral." He looked at David. "You saved their lives. Another hour in that ice and they would have been beyond recovery." "That doesn't change the regulations," Ford protested, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "No, it doesn't," Stevens agreed, "but it changes the moral equation considerably." He turned to Ford. "These beings came here seeking refuge. They were dying, and David showed them compassion. Are we the kind of colony that punishes compassion? We're the kind of colony that follows rules," Ford said, but he sounded tired now. "Rules that keep us safe. Rules that keep us afraid," Lucy said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "My teacher says rules should help people, not hurt them. How does it help anyone to split up families?" Nalith made a sound, that low rumble again. Her scales rippled with colors and David realized she was trying to communicate. She reached out one clawed hand, moving slowly, and placed it gently on the floor in front of Lucy. Then she lowered her head in what could only be a bow. The gesture spoke louder than any words. Lucy walked forward and placed her small hand on Nalith's snout. The dragon's eyes closed and her scales shifted to warmer colors. Doc Stevens smiled softly. "Well, Administrator, there's your answer. Intelligence, emotion, family bonds. They're people, just different than us." Ford stood silent for a long moment, his internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he sighed. "They can stay, temporarily. But there will be inspections, health checks, and if they show any signs of aggression or disease, they're gone." "Understood?" "Understood," David said, relief flooding through him. "And Walsh?" Ford added as he turned to leave. "You're still paying for all that power usage." After they left, Lucy hugged David tight. Spark climbed onto her shoulder, nearly knocking her over, and she laughed. Across the room, Grevik and Nalith watched their baby with their human saviors, and their scales glowed with colors that David was learning meant contentment and peace. Outside, in the colony corridors, word was spreading. The mechanic and his daughter had saved 3 dragons. Some people called it foolish. Others called it brave. A few were already wondering what other impossible things might be possible on Outpost Pharaoh 7. 3 weeks after the rescue, Lucy discovered that Spark could sense emotions. She was having a bad day, missing her mother with the sudden intensity that sometimes hit children who had lost a parent. She sat in the corner of the workshop, trying not to cry where her father could see when Spark waddled over and pressed his small body against her side. His scales shifted through colors, settling on a soft blue that somehow felt like comfort made visible. "How did you know I was sad?" Lucy whispered. Spark chirped and rested his head on her knee. Across the room, Nalith watched with those intelligent eyes, and Lucy understood. Dragons could feel what others felt. They sensed emotions the way humans saw colors. This discovery led to others. Grevik could detect vibrations in the metal and rock around them with such precision that he woke David one night by growling insistently at the workshop wall. David followed the dragon's focus and found a stress fracture in the support beam, one that would have collapsed within days. A repair crew fixed it the next morning, and by afternoon the entire colony knew. The dragons could sense structural problems. They could feel instabilities in the mining tunnels. They could detect ore deposits through solid rock. "They're living scanners," Rita Hughes said, standing in David's workshop with a datapad full of survey results. The old mining supervisor had gray hair and eyes that had seen 3 decades of asteroid mining. "Grevik found a platinum vein that our equipment missed completely. It's 300 meters down, but he knew it was there." David watched Grevik, who was lying near his heaters, occasionally rumbling in contentment. Nalith's wing was healing slowly, and she could move around the workshop now, though flying remained impossible. Spark played with a piece of scrap metal, trying to melt it with tiny puffs of flame that were more smoke than fire. "They're not tools, Rita," David said carefully. "I know that," Rita replied. "But David, this colony is dying. Production has dropped 40% in the last year. The company is talking about shutting us down, relocating everyone to the main hub. If these dragons, if Grevik and Nalith, if they could help us find new deposits." She trailed off, but David understood. The colony needed a reason to survive, and the dragons might be that reason. That evening, David sat with Grevik and Nalith while Lucy slept with Spark curled beside her. Doc Stevens had provided a translation device, a clunky piece of technology that turned the dragon's color changes and rumbling sounds into words on a screen. It was imperfect, but it worked. "Rita wants your help," David told them. "The colony is struggling. You could save it." The device flickered as Nalith's scales shifted through complex patterns. Words appeared on the screen. "You saved us, we help. Fair exchange." "It's more than that," David said. "If you help, you'll need to be official residents, registered. The company will want contracts, agreements. You'll be tied to this place." Grevik's response came through, "We have no home. Ship broke. Running from war. Planet gone." David felt something twist in his chest. Refugees. They were refugees fleeing something terrible, and their escape vehicle had failed them. They would have died in the ice if Lucy hadn't found Spark. "What happened to your world?" he asked quietly. Nalith's colors went dark, deep purples and blacks. The translation device struggled, producing fragments. Corporate wars, mining, planet stripped. Few escaped, scattered across stars, lost. So many species, David thought. destroyed by the same greed that now threatened Outpost Pharaoh 7. The irony was bitter. "If you help us," he said slowly, "we'll help you. We can send messages to other colonies, other systems. Look for more of your people." The dragons looked at each other in that way that suggested silent communication. Then Grevik stood, walked to the workshop door, and looked back at David expectantly. The next morning, David, Grevik, and a survey team descended into the deepest mine shaft on the asteroid. Administrator Ford had reluctantly approved the expedition after Rita presented the data from Grevik's previous discovery. The dragon moved through the tunnels with confidence, his claws clicking on metal and stone, his body occasionally pressing against walls as if listening to secrets hidden in the rock. 2 hours into the descent, Grevik stopped. He placed one clawed hand against a wall of solid stone and closed his eyes. His scales rippled with colors, and he made a sound that the portable translation device rendered as "here, deep, rich, much." The survey team drilled. 3 hours later, they broke through into a cavern filled with rare earth minerals, the kind that powered ship drives and communications arrays, the kind that were worth fortunes. Word spread through the colony like fire. By evening, people crowded outside David's workshop, wanting to see the dragons who had saved their home. Administrator Ford called an emergency colony meeting. The community hall was packed. David stood at the front with Lucy beside him while Grevik and Nalith waited outside, too large to fit through the door. Spark sat on Lucy's shoulder, his presence causing whispers and pointing. "The question before us is simple," Ford addressed the crowd. "Do we formally accept these aliens as colony residents? This means sharing resources, adjusting habitats, and fundamentally changing what Outpost Pharaoh 7 is." "They saved the colony," Rita called out. "They found deposits we never would have located. They're dangerous," another voice shouted. "We don't know what they're capable of." "I do," Lucy said, her small voice somehow cutting through the noise. The crowd quieted. "They're capable of love. They're capable of being scared. They're capable of being grateful. Just like us." She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, one of her drawings. It showed the Walsh family, David and Lucy, with 3 dragons beside them. All 5 figures held hands or claws under a bright sun. "This is my family now," Lucy said. "And families don't abandon each other." An older man stood up, someone David recognized as a longtime miner. "My tunnel collapsed last week. Would have been buried if not for Grevik warning us it was unstable. He saved my life," another person stood. "Nalith showed me colors yesterday and I felt calm for the first time since my son died. Don't know how, but she knew I needed it." More people stood, sharing stories. Doc Stevens spoke about the dragons' biology, their intelligence, their capacity for empathy. Rita presented economic data showing how dragon sensing could make the colony profitable again. Finally, Ford called for a vote. "All in favor of granting the dragons official resident status?" Hands rose throughout the hall. "Not everyone, but enough. More than enough," Ford nodded slowly. "Motion passes. Welcome to Outpost Pharaoh 7 officially." Outside, Grevik and Nalith sensed the emotional shift from the crowd inside. Their scales glowed warm colors that lit up the dark corridor. Spark chirped happily on Lucy's shoulder. That night, David received a message on his personal comm. It was from another colony, 3 systems away. They had heard about the dragons. They wanted to know if it was true. And they wanted to know if there was room for more refugees. David looked at Lucy sleeping with Spark, at Grevik and Nalith resting peacefully in his workshop turned sanctuary, and he thought about all the other desperate families freezing somewhere in the dark. He began typing his response. 6 months after the first rescue, Outpost Pharaoh 7 looked like a different world. The colony had expanded, adding heated habitat modules that glowed like amber jewels against the ice. 17 dragon families now called the asteroid home. Each one pulled from the edge of death by rescue teams that David had trained. The mining colony had become something else entirely, something the galaxy had never seen before. Lucy walked through the central plaza holding Spark's clawed hand. The young dragon, now the size of a large dog and learning to fly in short bursts. Around them, human children played with dragon hatchlings in a carefully heated park that Rita had designed. The sound of laughter, both human and the musical chirping of young dragons, filled the air. Lucy Walsh? She turned to find a woman in an expensive suit. the kind that marked her as someone from far beyond this little asteroid. A camera drone hovered behind her, recording everything. "I'm Nicole Park, Galactic News Network. Can I ask you a few questions?" Lucy had learned to be wary of reporters. They had swarmed the colony for weeks after word got out about the Dragon Sanctuary, each one wanting the story of the little girl who had started it all. "My dad says I don't have to talk to reporters," Lucy said politely. "Just one question," Nicole pressed. "Why did you do it? Why save them when you knew it might cause trouble?" Lucy looked at Spark, who chirped curiously at the camera drone. "Because they needed help," she said simply. "Why wouldn't I?" In his office overlooking the plaza, David met with representatives from 3 different corporations, all wanting to establish contracts with the Dragon residents. The aliens' sensing abilities had become legendary. Mining companies wanted them for prospecting. Construction firms wanted them for structural analysis. Research institutes wanted to study their unique biology. "The Dragons are not for hire," David said for the 10th time that day. "They're residents, not resources. We're offering very generous compensation," one representative insisted. "Enough to upgrade your entire colony." "They're people," David replied flatly. "Would you hire a human who just survived genocide?" "They're refugees, not contractors." The representatives left unsatisfied, but David knew they would be back. Money always came back. Doc Stevens appeared in the doorway after the suits departed. "We have a situation," the old medic said. "Visitors at the landing pad. Dragons, but not refugees?" David's stomach tightened. He followed Stevens to the pad where a sleek ship had docked, its design angular and aggressive. 3 adult dragons stood near the ramp, their scales dark and their postures hostile. A young dragon, barely older than Spark, stood with them, his body language radiating anger. Grevik and Nalith were already there with Rita and several security officers. The tension in the air felt dangerous. "I am Vrel," one of the newcomers announced. His voice translated through a device more advanced than anything the colony possessed. "These humans hold our people captive. We demand their release." "No one is captive here," David said, stepping forward. "Everyone is free to leave. Free?" Vrel's scales darkened further. "Free to serve human interests? Free to find minerals for the species that destroyed worlds? You dress oppression in kindness?" Lucy arrived with Spark, pushing through the crowd. The young dragon with Vrel saw Spark and made a sound of recognition. They knew each other, David realized. "Thorn?" Spark chirped, his scales showing surprise and confusion. The young dragon Thorn looked between Spark and the humans. "You live with them," Thorn said, disgust clear even through translation. "You've forgotten what they are." "They saved my life," Spark replied. "They saved all of us." "They saved you to use you," Vrel interrupted. "This is how they work. They show kindness to hide their exploitation." Nalith stepped forward, placing herself between the newcomers and Lucy. Her scales shifted through complex colors, and the translation device struggled to keep up. "You speak of humans as oppressors," Nalith's translation read. "But this human risked death in ice to save strangers. This child gave warmth when we were freezing. Where were you when we needed help?" "Surviving," Vrel shot back. "Fighting. Not becoming pets." "We are not pets," Grevik rumbled, moving beside his mate. "We are partners, family." "Family?" Vrel laughed, a harsh sound. "You've lost your minds. Lost your pride. Lost everything that made you dragon." Thorn looked torn, his scales flickering between colors. He stared at Spark, at Lucy standing protectively beside her friend, at the heated habitats visible in the distance where dragon families lived in comfort. "They have hatchlings," Thorn said quietly. "Growing healthy, playing." "In cages of human design," Vrel insisted. "No," Lucy said, her voice cutting through the argument. "In homes. There's a difference." Vrel turned his full attention to her, and David fought the urge to pull his daughter back. The dragon's eyes were cold, calculating. "You are the child," Vrel said, "the one who began this. Do you know what you've done? You've made our people dependent on yours. What happens when humans decide we're no longer useful? What happens when profit matters more than compassion?" Lucy met his gaze without flinching. "Then we'll fight to protect them. The same way they'd fight to protect us." Pretty words from a child who knows nothing of the real galaxy. "I know that 17 families are alive because we helped them," Lucy replied. "I know that Spark is my friend and I'm his. I know that my mom used to say the only thing evil needs to win is for good people to do nothing. We did something." The plaza had filled with colonists and dragons, all watching the confrontation. David saw Administrator Ford at the back, his hand hovering near his communicator, ready to call for help if needed. Thorn took a step toward Spark, then another. The two young dragons stared at each other for a long moment. Then Thorn's scales shifted to warmer colors. "I thought you were dead," Thorn said quietly. "After the homeworld fell, I thought everyone from my hatching group was dead." "Almost," Spark replied. "Would have been if not for Lucy and David." Thorn looked at the humans again, his hostility fading into confusion. "They really just helped you?" "For nothing." "Not for nothing," Lucy said. "For friendship." Vrel made a disgusted sound. "Thorn, we're leaving. These people are lost to our cause." But Thorn didn't move. "What cause?" he asked. "Survival? That's what we're doing here. Actually surviving, not just running." "You're a fool," Vrel spat. "Maybe," Thorn agreed. "But I'm a living fool in a warm place with my friend. Better than a dead warrior in the ice." Vrel and his companions left, their ship launching with aggressive speed that shook the landing pad. David watched them go with a mixture of relief and worry. They wouldn't be the last to question what outpost Pharaoh 7 was building. That evening, Thorn sat with Spark and Lucy in the plaza, watching the stars. "My parents died in the evacuation," he said quietly. "I've been alone since." "You're not alone anymore," Lucy said, taking his clawed hand the way she held Spark's. David watched from a distance, Rita beside him. "This is going to get complicated," Rita observed. "It already is," David replied. "But look at them." "Tell me it's not worth it," Rita smiled. "Never said it wasn't. Just said it would be complicated." A message notification appeared on David's datapad. Another colony requesting information about the sanctuary program. The 15th such request this week. Word was spreading, hope was growing, and somewhere in the galaxy, more desperate families were looking to the stars and seeing possibility instead of just darkness. David began typing his response, wondering how many more lives they could save before the galaxy decided to stop them. The holographic display filled the colony's community hall, showing the faces of 12 council members from 12 different species, each one representing a portion of galactic authority that most humans would never see in their lifetimes. David stood before them with Lucy beside him, Grevik and Nalith flanking them like guardians, and the entire population of Outpost Pharaoh 7 watching from seats that stretched to the back wall. This hearing will determine the legal status of the entity calling itself Haven Station, formerly Outpost Pharaoh 7, announced Council Speaker Trell, a being whose species David couldn't identify. "Mr. Walsh, you stand accused of harboring refugees without proper authorization, establishing an unsanctioned sanctuary, and violating 17 interspecies contact protocols. How do you answer?" "Guilty," David said simply. "Guilty of all of it." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Lucy squeezed his hand. "You understand this could result in the dismantling of your colony, the deportation of all unauthorized aliens, and your own imprisonment?" "I understand. Then why do it?" David looked at Lucy, at the dragons, at the community they had built. "Because it was right. Because laws that prevent helping people who are dying aren't just laws. They're failures of imagination." One council member, a being covered in crystalline structures that refracted light into rainbows, leaned forward. "You presume to judge galactic law? I presume to question any law that chooses bureaucracy over compassion," David replied. Before the council could respond, Administrator Ford stood up. "If I may address the council," Speaker Trell gestured permission. "I was against this from the beginning," Ford said. "Every regulation in my body screamed that what David Walsh was doing was wrong, dangerous, and illegal. I tried to stop him." He paused. "I was mistaken. What we've built here, what these people and these dragons have created together, it's shown me that sometimes the rules need to change because reality has moved beyond them." Rita stood next. "I've been mining asteroids for 30 years. I've seen colonies rise and fall, seen companies strip worlds bare and move on. This colony was dying before the dragons came. Now we're thriving not because we're exploiting them, but because we're working together. That's not a crime. That's evolution." Doc Stevens added his voice. "I've studied the dragons extensively. They're not simple creatures. They're empathic, intelligent, capable of complex emotional bonds. They feel loss like we do, love like we do, hope like we do. To treat them as anything less than people is the real crime." One by one, colonists stood and shared their stories, the miner whose life Grevik had saved, The mother whose daughter had been comforted by Nalith's presence after a nightmare. The engineer who had learned new construction techniques from dragon perspective. The child who had found a friend in a species that shouldn't have been possible. Then Nalith stepped forward. Her wing had healed well enough for limited flight, and her scales shimmered with colors that needed no translation device to convey emotion. We were dying in ice. Her translated voice played through the hall's speakers. Cold and hopeless and waiting for death. A child found us. A child who could have walked away, could have let nature take its course, could have followed every rule. Instead, she cried for help. Her father came into the freezing dark and pulled us back to life. Nalith's scales shifted to deep blue. We lost our world to greed, lost our families to war, lost our hope to endless running. Here we found all three again, not because humans are perfect, but because some humans chose to see us as worth saving. Gravik spoke next. We offer partnership, not servitude. We help because we choose to, because they helped us first. This is how civilization should work. Not exploitation, but exchange. Not dominance, but cooperation. Speaker Trell's expression was unreadable. Your words are moving, but they do not address the core issue. Galactic law exists to prevent chaos, to ensure order. Order? Lucy's voice rang out small but fierce. What order says it's okay to let families freeze to death? What order says helping people is illegal? Child, you don't understand the complexities, one council member began. I understand that Spark would be dead if I followed your complexities, Lucy interrupted. I understand that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking stupid rules. My teacher says rules should help people, and if they don't, they're just bullying with paperwork. Despite the tension, several council members showed what might have been amusement. Speaker Trell raised a hand for silence. This council will adjourn to deliberate, Trell announced. The holographic displays went dark, leaving the community hall in anxious silence. David pulled Lucy close and she buried her face in his chest. Around them, humans and dragons waited together, their fates intertwined. 20 minutes later, the displays flickered back to life, but instead of the council chambers, they showed a different dragon. Ancient and massive. Her scales carrying patterns that suggested centuries of life. I am Elder Sareth, the dragon announced. I speak for the scattered remnants of our people. She looked directly at David through the camera. The council asked for my testimony. They wanted to know if dragons were truly endangered, truly desperate. I told them yes, but I also told them something they did not expect. The view shifted to show Elder Sareth standing before the full Galactic Council. What you call Outpost Pharaoh 7, we call hope, her recorded voice continued. For months we have watched this colony. We needed to know if humanity, if any species, was capable of genuine compassion toward those different from themselves. We needed to know if the galaxy had any corners left where kindness mattered more than profit. David Walsh and his daughter Lucy answered that question. They passed a test that thousands of others failed. The view returned to the council chambers where Speaker Trell looked shaken. The dragons have offered advanced prospecting technology to Haven Station in gratitude. Technology that will make the colony economically viable beyond any previous projections. This changes the council's analysis considerably. Another council member spoke. In light of new evidence and Elder Sareth's testimony, this council recognizes Haven Station as the first officially sanctioned compassionate sanctuary under newly created protocols. Other colonies may apply for similar status. The galaxy's approach to refugee integration will be reevaluated based on this model. The community hall erupted in cheers. Lucy jumped up and down while Spark flew circles above her head, finally having mastered flight. Gravik and Nalith touched foreheads in their species' expression of joy, their scales blazing with warm colors that lit the entire room. David felt tears on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. Around him, humans and dragons celebrated together, the barriers between species dissolving into shared relief and happiness. That evening, as the celebration continued in the plaza, David found himself standing outside his workshop with Lucy, the place where everything had started, where a freezing baby dragon had changed the course of their lives and an entire colony's future. Daddy, Lucy said quietly, Elder Sareth said there are more dragons out there, more families that need help. I know, David replied. Can we help them too? David looked at the stars, at the infinite possibilities they represented. Somewhere out there, other desperate families fled through the cold. Other children waited for someone to care. Other communities needed to learn that compassion wasn't a weakness. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, picking her up and holding her close. "We can help them too." Spark landed on his shoulder with Thorn beside him, both young dragons chirping contentedly. Inside the workshop, David could see Grevik and Nalith preparing nest space for their second egg. Life continuing in warmth and safety. Haven Station glowed against the darkness of space, a small point of light that proved something the galaxy had forgotten. That kindness mattered, that compassion transcended species, that sometimes all it took to change everything was one person willing to say yes when the world said no. In the distance, David's communicator chimed with another message from another colony, another request for help, another chance to prove that the universe was bigger than fear. He smiled and began to type his response. Knowing that Lucy would be right beside him when the next family needed saving, the next child cried out for help. The next impossible choice had to be made. The cold was vast, but warmth could be shared. And in sharing it, they would light up the galaxy one rescue at a time.